Sharp Hub program, which is a program funded by the National Institutes of Health, have worked to put together this workshop series. This is a workshop series that is intended to target innovators in South Dakota who are interested in learning more about the pathway to commercialization for translating your research into the marketplace. This workshop series is intended to target really anybody in South Dakota that's working on an early stage technology that needs to be commercialized. And because it's funded by the National Institutes of Health, there is definitely a focus on life sciences and biomedical technologies. That said, if you are not a researcher or you're not working with life sciences or biomed tech, this is absolutely still the workshop series for you, and we are very happy to have you. My name is Beth Lambeth. I'm the Technology Transfer Officer at the University of South Dakota, and I'm here to represent the Sharp Hub program, the one funded by the National Institutes of Health. Today we have Dan James speaking with us about value proposition. On November 21st, we have our startup school speaker is Tony Olson with D2 Consulting in North Sioux, who will be speaking with us about intellectual property and the role that IP has in your business strategy. On December 5th, we have Dan Ingebrigtsen from USD's Biomedical Engineering Department and Gary Archambault speaking about funding a small business and, of course, more specifically, a tech startup. And on December 12th, we have Mark Slade from the Small Business Development Center to speak with us about creating a value proposition. I will, before I introduce Michelle from USSBA, Joni, is there anything you want to add to that? I'm just putting you on the spot there about startup school or what we're doing.
Nope, I think you covered it.
Okay, perfect. So that's what we're doing here at Startup School. I will introduce Michelle from the U.S. Small Business Administration, who will speak with us a little bit about resources for entrepreneurs that she has for South Dakota.
I'm not going to pass these out because I know a lot of you are refused. They will be in the back of the room. So we are part of the CEO Center. So we are downstairs. We have the Small Business Development Center is one of our partners. Gary's part of that. We have a SCORE program that we're doing this business center. And there's just a little flyer about it that if you need business plans, projections, we do the loans for the state. So if you have any questions, please let us know. I just want to let you know that we are a resource share. Thank you.
If I wanted to get an RV or something like that, could I get a loan, do you think, or
Are you using it for business?
maybe?
Well, maybe.
Trip to the Bahamas, necessary work expense.
Maybe.
With that, I will introduce Dan James, who just flew in yesterday to Sioux Falls. So for a brief bio, for the last 9 years, Dan James has led James Solutions Incorporated, a company focused on sales excellence. And he has also recently joined, or not recently, within the last several years, the Black Hills Regional Angel Fund. Immediately prior to that, Dan concluded his 43-year career with DuPont Company, where he acted as Chief Sales Officer for that huge corporation. While in this newly created role, Dan led a global team that delivered innovative compensation, sales management, recognition, negotiation, and basic professional selling skills programs that enabled substantially improved sales and earning results. Prior to this role, he was Global Sales Director for DuPont Chemical Solutions, a multi-billion-dollar producer of specialty and industrial chemicals. He held positions in the United States as Market and Business Director for the Clean and Disinfectant Portfolio business. He was a Six Sigma champion for DCSE. Dan lived in Hong Kong, and I loved your stories about parking in Hong Kong. And was Managing Director of DuPont Specialty Chemicals, Asia Pacific from 93 to 99. From 91 to 93, served as Group Managing Director for all of DuPont's business in the ASEAN region. While residing in Singapore, Dan served as a director in the Singapore Economic Development Board. And I also loved hearing about your time in Singapore. It sounds like a wonderful place to live.
Great place to eat.
A great place, yeah, and all the restaurants. Also wanted to mention that Dan is on the board of NanoPharrell, a company deploying nanofiber technology to perform biopharma separations. So Dan is very, very much invested in South Dakota entrepreneurism and startups, and we're very happy to have you here today to speak with us about value propositions.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm sorry, are you awake yet?
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. All right. So one of the sort of sub-themes that probably didn't come out in that introduction because the way I wrote it, I suppose now that I think about it, was that a sub-theme for my 38 of my 43 years at DuPont probably was value. And is in essence, whether you're doing marketing or sales work, and I'd say, especially if you're looking at developing a new business or even doing research on something that you see that might have commercial application. At the center of that, if it isn't, should be at least the beginning understanding and focus on what it's worth. What's the value of the thing that I'm working on? So today, I want to focus on this notion of a value proposition, because whether you're starting a business, whether you're running a business, whether you're contemplating starting a business, whether you're doing research on something that might end up being a business, a really powerful way to focus and guide your attention is to start from the very beginning to focus on what kind of value can I create in the world with this item, this thing, this service, this product that I'm working on. And the reason for that is that an experience relates to an experience I had when I was in my last job at DuPont, which was informed by a lot of others. DuPont at the time had a top 50 R&D project program, and this was things that were supposed to be commercial within 3 years. All right, so these weren't sort of pie in the sky things at this point, or weren't supposed to be pie in the sky things at that point. They were supposed to be things that were going to be commercialized within 3 years. So just real quick from the group here. By the way, this is called the fickle finger. If I don't get any responses, I'll just point to you and ask for one, so you know it's coming. If you were going to be 3 years away from in introducing something on a commercial scale, what would you want to know about that? What would you want to know? What are some of the kinds of things that you ought to be probably knowledgeable about?
Who's your target?
When you say who's your target, help me just a little more.
For my product, one of the products I'm developing, who should I approach to educate about the value?
Who's going to use my stuff, right? Who's got some use for it? That's
Or
great.
Who's gonna buy it?
Right.
Someone else.
Okay, so relating to that, what else would you want to know?
How great is their need?
How great is their need? Is there some gap right now that exists? I wish it were, I wish my yield were higher. I wish the quality were better. I wish the cost were lower. That last one's always on the table. Anything else? Who are the competitors in the space? And what's the competitive movement over some period of time? So anyway, we looked at the 50 projects, and because the return on R&D in DuPont had not been anything close to what it should have been for several billion, about $3.5 billion a year in R&D, you'd expect a substantial return on that. And in fact, the leadership of the corporation was eventually removed. And one of the key reasons for it was the return wasn't there. All the famous stuff from DuPont was 2 or 3 decades old. There were exceptions, but by and large, the return wasn't there. So when we asked the 50 project groups to say, we showed them something I'll show you in a minute, around a format for how you might describe a value proposition for what they were working on. We looked at all 50, we gave them 6 weeks to tune their value propositions, when in fact, most of them didn't even have one to begin with. And at the end of the 6-week period, 4 of those businesses did an excellent job. And all 4 of them happened to be in the Pioneer Seed Company, which at the time was owned by DuPont. It's now part of a company called Corteva. And the reason why they were so excellent, they were very, very targeted. They were looking at products that would help corn grow more effectively in drought conditions. They knew exactly where those conditions existed. They knew the kind of yield improvement they were trying to deliver, and they knew what that was going to be worth. And so all their business was focused on driving to achieve those goals. Everybody with me so far? 4 out of 50. The other ones were like, and the words great unbelievable, amazing technology. You can't believe how many places we could possibly use this stuff, right? This is death to any business, and I would argue most are indeed. If you think you've got a great technology, but you can't focus on one or two things where there's likely to be a positive commercial outcome, you might find a lot of interesting stuff out, but that's not gonna lead very far. It's not gonna take you too far. And so again, one way to focus and find out, are you on the right track? Do you have something that is commercially viable? Is this notion of using a technique called the value proposition. So someone might ask me, so what is a value proposition? So there's a guy named Mohan Sawani at the Chicago School of Business, and he came up with that definition. Can you read that from where you are? I'm apologizing in green, so it might be tough. It's the compelling promise that an offering makes to a defined target audience that outweighs its total perceived cost while being differentiated from available alternatives and supported by reasons to believe. There's a mouthful for you right there. Okay? Breaking it down to something that I understand a little better, I would say it explains the value in a compelling way. It gives customers powerful reasons to buy your offering. So basically, you're laying out a story to say, why is this something you should be interested in versus what you're doing now? And why should you trust that what I'm going to give you, in fact, is going to be something that's superior to what you're using now? And part of that reason to believe, particularly for startup companies, relates to, I've got financing and I can actually produce this once you decide you want to use it. So there's a lot of different elements here. But why might it be important to the success of your business? Not just selling, but what other aspects of your business might be important that this value proposition could help you with? How else could it help your business be successful?
I think if you're doing like development of your technology, it gives you a direction in which you should be developing it.
Exactly. Right, because if you know where you're going, it gives you the ability to test it and to find out, yes, I'm getting kind of the right sort of vibes here. We can solve a problem that's important enough to somebody to want to take action with us. It also helps us make a decision to change course if that's not the right place. Almost anything you develop that becomes commercially successful almost always has more than one value it creates for the customer. If, for example, we're improving yield, we're probably also reducing waste at the same time. Both of those things have value. And a lot of times we tend to be sort of mono-focused on just the one thing we were trying to accomplish. But one of the ways companies are successful is to identify and look at all the things that we bring to the party, all the value we create for our customers. The other thing is, if you can't, can we cut the light down just a little bit? Is it hard to see that? It's hard for me to see it if I'm standing up here. That's better. Is that better? From the back seats there? Can I get a or something back there? Somebody there? All right, so customers are always kind of in this balancing act, right? They're looking at, what we say are the benefits, how we're different from what it is they're using now, and what kind of support we can provide them. So when we walk in the door, we kind of put our story on the table. But they're always balancing that off against what we're going to charge them for that. Another thesis that a lot of salespeople who should know better don't really recognize is that when we talk about how we price our product, we're always sharing value with the customer. If we reduce the price, then the benefits increase for them. If we increase the price, the benefits reduce. So it's always kind of a sharing act here, and the issue is, to be successful, we got to come up with the right balance. But they're also looking about, what kind of risk am I going to take? The biggest risk in most companies, the fast track to losing your job if you're in a supply role, is to not be able to get product into the business when they need it. But there's also how much effort, how much am I going to have to change? What are the other things I'm going to have to do to be able to use your stuff instead of my stuff? Do I have to let 15 people go? But the productivity is way better than it was before. Do I have to change the way I treat waste? Do I have to do something else different? And so there's a kind of a fairly complex equation, unless you're just bringing in an exact in-kind substitute for something else, which is probably not what you needed to develop in the first place. The balancing act goes on. Is it right for me? But here's two other things then. The value proposition statement is a very crisp, exact way of saying, here's what our product is worth, here's how it's different from what you're using now, and here's how we can support that in a way that you'll be successful making this change. Importantly though, the second dimension, which is frequently overlooked, it helps us inside the company answer the question, why? Why are we in business? What is it we're in business to do? And the answer is, we're in business to deliver value to the customer. All right? We'll do good for the customer, and by doing so, we'll do well ourselves. And so this becomes a unifying principle for what you do as a business. Our business is to deliver value to those customers in that way. And it's a powerful way to define it. Yes, sir?
I'm finding that it's within a target, there are other targets to talk to for value. What has become most important is the price of your product and the price of your service. There's also another one there that I'm gonna have to prove, is the reliability that my product gives to the customer. So now
In terms of the quality of their product, or how
the reliability.
Can you tell us what your product is? Give us a handle or some context here.
Yeah, well, it happens to be one of the products happen to be electrically conductive lubricant for connectors.
Okay.
On electric vehicles. So if I can improve the reliability of that connector by extending the service life, it's gonna bring down their maintenance or whatever costs that way. So the price of the product is gonna have to be amortized over several areas, right? And there's always that big quality, reliability battle and price. Well, it's gonna cost too much to do this 12 sigma or 6 sigma reliability.
Yeah, if it's 12, I think you're probably in real trouble.
I think I'm at 18 sigma.
All right, well, I'm signing up. So, anyway, okay, so usually when you're in these situations, there's a number of things to balance, right? But the important thing is to say who benefits the most from the value that I bring. Hey, Mel, who benefits the most from the value I bring? And frequently, if you're talking to the purchasing agents, what do purchasing agents get rewarded for?
Saving money.
Saving money, all right? And that may or may not improve the profit of the company. There's sort of an implication it probably does. But frequently, what we found in my businesses where if you said, like, what does DuPont sell? We had, 80 different strategic business units. It was, generally speaking, productivity. And the person who develops, gets paid most for that is somebody in operations. The people who make things get compensated very differently for different things than the purchasing folks. So again, sometimes it's critically important to say, like, who really benefits the most from the value I'm bringing, and how do I make sure they understand it too? DuPont used to be in the paint business for OEM for cars, and we literally had people on site at GM, for example, who literally supervised the painting. They weren't GM employees, they were DuPont employees, but we were there making sure everything was exactly right. And then, the price of the paint included the cost of having those people there. When sales of U.S. vehicles went way down a few years back, that was no longer a viable service to provide at the price we were charging at the time. So we went for a price increase, and of course they were already in trouble. The GM was already in trouble anyway, and the purchasing guy said, no, hell no, you can't raise the price. And so our folks went around to the operations folks and said, look, here's our story. If you want to continue with what we're doing, if you want to continue to put out perfect quality paint jobs on the cars, we need the extra price. And they got the price increase. But the purchasing agent never agreed. He had to agree because somebody told him eventually. So again, who benefits? Who benefits from what you bring is an important person to identify. That's a great question. Okay. So here's a kind of a format for for what that value proposition statement looks like. And again, the first piece of it, we'll talk some more about this in a little bit, is the target segment. All right? In other words, what you're developing could have lots of uses in lots of different places. The Black Hills Regional Angel Fund, we see, 5, 6 presentations every couple of months from people that have really terrific technologies. And when they start off saying there's at least 50 different applications for this product, I immediately want to say time out. Identify 2 or 3 things that you think are the likely places that you'll get real traction with this product. Because if you're a startup business particularly, but if you're a big business, you can't focus on that many things at a time. And so the notion is, ranging the field. I used to do quail hunting back when I was in DuPont. Somebody was paying for it down south in a really exotic kind of neat place. And the fact is, if 12 quail, come out of a covey all at once and you don't pick one, you'll never hit 2, right? And so it's that kind of theory. The notion is, where do you focus to make sure I'm picking a place, at least at the beginning, to find out, is this a likely place where value will work? And if it doesn't work, you pick the next one, and you pick the next one, until you find out either there aren't any places that have value for what you've got, or now I've struck the right note and got forward. What's the need? Back to your point. What is it I'm solving? What's the gap in the current system that I can help close? How can I make it better? This one basically says, what am I? Frame of reference is like, what is it we do? What are we, and what do we deliver in terms of our performance and value? What's it worth is the benefits piece. I'm going to give you some specific examples in a minute, so this will be a lot less vague. The what's it worth piece is important to just talk about for a minute, because on B2B stuff, it can't be vague things like percentages. Someone famous, I can't remember who it was right now, say JP Morgan said, you can never spend a percentage. It's dollars and cents. So when you talk about the value you can deliver, you need to be able to focus down and say, here's what it's worth. If you make this shift, we can save you $1 million a year. We can help you produce another 200 units, the value of which, the incremental contribution from those 200 units is this amount of money. You need to be able to get quite granular. In DuPont, a lot of the sales folks, sales folks, by the way, don't have good answers to some of these questions. There are people who are out selling things every day. And so the moment of crisis for a lot of salespeople is when they have to raise the price and they're jittering because they don't really know how they're sharing value with the customers now. Right? I know I'm creating this much, so if I raise the price, they're still in the green. They're not going to be happy, so be it. Life's like that sometimes. But if you know what your value is, you can understand how much you can move and still retain your business. All right? If you don't know it, you have some fuzzy little percentage kind of number. You have no basis for an argument of any power as you're trying to sell a price increase. Point of difference. We do it differently. I've got a different kind of lubricant that provides the conductivity you need, or the lack of conductivity, whichever it is, and it does it this way. So here's an explanation of help them make sense of why you're different and how you deliver the benefit. And then finally, here's the reason to believe. I'm backed up by the Small Business Administration, the state of South Dakota, or whatever it is, that wherever your funding is coming from, to say, I actually can make this stuff and deliver it, right? So that's kind of the picture.
Yeah, well, there's a problem with the product that I'm manufacturing, is when they ask, well, what have you got in it? So you're hoping that they're trained well enough to understand what you're going to tell them.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if they understand it, do they have value to that? So now, when you're discussing whether they're going to use it or not, they have to be someone. I've gotten to the point where I try to evaluate the people I'm talking with.
Or you can tell them it's dimethyl chicken wire with some fuzz in here, but here's what it does. It lowers the coefficient of friction in a substantial and different way.
You've been reading my literature?
So anyway, yeah, no, you're right. But sometimes, the person you're talking to might not really understand intricacies of the science, but you can say it creates a softer kind of texture, the molecules are more pliable, or something like that that gives them a reason to say, here's how it works. And then ultimately, they got to test it and find out whether it does work or not. and there's not something in there that's gonna give everybody a rash when you put it in the car or something, right? So, okay, so we're gonna take a quick trip down memory lane, which is something you probably can't afford to do yourself. Now let me see, how am I gonna do this? Does that work? No, hold on just a minute, I've gotta do something tricky up top here. I don't know about you, I find this very difficult to do from a distance. It's always the AV stuff that gets to you in the end. Wait a minute, it should be. Did he come up yet? No. All right, help me out. I'm trying to project that. If we don't get this, I'll just do a quick impression for you.
Anyone a Mac user?
Actually, I am, it's, the problem has, did I, do I have to shut down the other thing? Go for it, I'm just trying to project that, yes. Just talk with yourselves for a minute.
Where is that island?
I don't know, this is one of these, things that comes with your Mac, so I'm not sure.
That's Catalina.
Well, there you go.
What's Catalina?
That is Catalina, you're right, it's the name of the latest, thing. I don't know how you did that, but that's it, go for it. And we should have the sound on, let's see. It's not, but that's all right. 2001. I might need you to get the other one back.
iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket.
So, that was a value proposition. Right there, it's 2001, how times have changed. Only 2001. And where would we come now? If we can get back to the other thing, I would be really grateful. And we don't have to watch whatever comes next on that. You can kill that one if you want. There we go. Catalina, in case you're wondering where that is. 26 miles across the sea.
You were in Power Query.
Yes, sir. Oh, you got it. We just have to go up to view. And go to presenter's view, way up there, down here now. Oh, okay. How about a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you. Okay. So, this is a B2C thing, which is different than I spent my most life doing, but let's take a look at now and see how would you put a value proposition together for the original iPod. That was, by the way, their very first commercial, 2001. So, who's the segment? Well, initially it was young, hip, first adopter types, all right, who saw the chance to get, once it was launched, obviously anybody that had music and saw that it worked, I mean, the world became sort of the potential customer for this, and of course, eventually iPhones and stuff came from that. What are the core needs people require? A lot of people want entertainment in the form of music. What's our offering name? It's the iPod and iTunes. Frame of reference is a portable electronic device. What is it? With a readily accessible source of music to put on it. That's kind of what it is. All right. Now, all of a sudden, now we're starting to focus down on who's it for. We'll start with young, hip, first adopters, music. We've got this kind of thing. Benefits all your music with you all the time, anywhere, and access to a very, very large body of music. Point of difference, at the time, the Sony Walkman was the happening deal. You'd snap in that little cassette, you know, I had maybe 3 or 4 of those. That was so cool. I went to China and I think I had 150 cassettes with me. I was there for about a month doing a joint venture. And the woman who was our translator, I think probably made $500,000 copying those and selling them all over China. But anyhow, the house is a complete integrated solution. All the Walkman was a player. Slap it in and go. You had to provide your own music, and it was kind of big, kind of bulky. They got smaller over time, but this was way smaller. And you have the opportunity. What's the reason to believe? First, it's from Apple's iPod, has excellent sound storage of 1,000 songs and seamless access to millions of songs, which at the time I thought were kind of expensive, but over time you get used to it because it's so easy to get them. Right? Now, this one doesn't follow the Dan rule about dollars and cents. And the reason was the order of magnitude they were going after in this group probably wasn't particularly price sensitive. And it was priced in a way that was kind of within reach, all right? So this is a B2C thing. So what I want to do now is give you a different kind of example in the world that maybe many of you would be operating on, which is in a B2B kind of environment. So I'm going to ask everybody in the room now to sort of place yourself in the lab, okay? Have your cranium grow another 20% or so. You're thinking big thoughts, doing heavy technical work. And you come up with a product that eventually you're going to call CalRes. It's a perfluoroelastomer that can withstand high temperatures over 600 degrees Fahrenheit and is virtually impervious to 1,800 different chemicals. All right, the definition of really cool technology. All right? You could probably use this in thousands of places, right? The problem was they invented it, and they had sort of found this one. They weren't targeting something. It just came out of some other work they were doing. But it was so remarkable, they said, we need to see if we can find what to do with this. But in fact, they didn't have a really firm idea of where can it be used, except in some pretty nasty environments. So as luck would have it, the brother-in-law of one of the inventors was running a coal gasification plant, of which this is a picture, and I'm not going to even attempt to explain it to you, except where it's red, it's hot, and where it's red and yellow, it's hot and corrosive both. Okay, everybody got the code. In other words, it's a nasty, nasty environment. Now, the other thing about this is they take high sulfur oil, tars, pet coke, that kind of stuff, biomass, shove it in the front end, juice it up with some oxygen, and basically create gaseous materials, which end up being syngas, which is used to synthesize a variety of organic chemicals, methanol being one of them. And then the rest of this is electricity. All right, so there's electricity and a valuable synthetic chemical come out of the process. The other thing you'll notice is that everything is connected to everything else. Let me say it again. Everything is connected to everything else. It's kind of like life, isn't it? No. Anyway, the point here is, and in all of these places, there are all kinds of requirements to measure pressure and temperature. There also have to be places where you can access the inside of the equipment if you need to do maintenance work. Each of those things is protected by an O-ring, a very small, generally speaking, low-value product that enables you. Does anybody here preserve stuff?
No.
Okay, it's that thing, it's kind of the equivalent of the thing you stick on the ball jar, right? Yes, sir?
What you're saying is you could have used this on the Challenger.
Exactly, and I think it might be in later versions. It's got aerospace applications as well. So anyway, the guy pointed out to them that we have a really nasty environment. If you think you've got something that's better than what we're using now, we'd be interested in seeing what you've got. And so what they were using now was nitrile rubber O-rings. And what our guys were able to find out was these things required replacement every 3 months. Now, it wasn't like it was on a schedule, but on average they lasted 3 months and failed in a non-predictable way. Okay, so the only virtue these things had was, one, they did seal until they failed, but they were cheap. They were only on average, about $1.99 a piece for pieces that were this size to this size, but the average was about $1.99. Well, it turns out, doing some accelerated testing, it turns out CalRes ought to last at least 3 years. Who's good with the math? How many times better is that? 12 times better. You got it, Dan. Okay? So, how would you price CalRes? Now we're talking about value, right? What is CalRes worth? So, the math is pretty simple, right? $1.99 times 12. So you price it at $24 a piece, and you get $24,000 instead of $1,900. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
Yeah.
Got it? Make sense? Then how come they charge $175 a piece?
This is replacement cost, personnel.
Exactly. Okay, what they found out was that mean time between repairs was the biggest problem these facilities have. When you shut the thing down, remember how everything's connected to everything else? When you shut the thing down, everything goes down. All right, and all of a sudden, it reminds me of one of those, when I was a kid, we used to have these movies from China where like something would happen and like 200 people would come running in at a fast pace. They'd be taking things apart and putting them back together. It's sort of like that. It required 31 people making $40 an hour, $10,000 at a crack, and every time they shut down, it cost them $100,000 out of pocket to bring in the experts, to deal with reassembly, disassembly, reassembly. They had to bring in people they normally didn't have because these things are porky. When you try to restart them, you need expert help. There's all kinds of pinch points. There's corrosive material. You kind of get the picture, okay? But so it was 500 grand. So what we decided to do, what they decided to do to put their case together was to say, okay, we can't say that every shutdown comes from failed O-rings. But we're gonna say instead of 12 breakdowns over 3 years, we're gonna prevent 5 of those. We're gonna prevent 5 of them. So we're not taking full credit because we don't even know if that's true, but 5 is a reasonable estimate. Turned out to be higher, but this was fine. So that's 500,000. But the other thing that was happening is over that 3 years, if they had 5 shutdowns, they would lose 25 days of production. No electricity, no syngas. And the big number was $2.5 million. Okay, so all of a sudden, $173,000 investment for CalRes in higher money seemed like a pretty damn good investment versus this. Okay, what's the point of this? Number one, we tend to underestimate how much we're worth because we tend to look at one single dimension of value rather than starting to pull things apart to say, what are all the ways that our product can create value? Everybody with me so far? Okay, on that? The other thing is, if you're starting a business or anticipating starting a business, sooner or later you're going to need some money from somebody else, unless you're, an inherently wealthy person, or you're the government. Either way, you have an unlimited source of money. But so here's the point. First off, let me show you the value prop then for this one. So for manufacturing operations in refining, power generation, and chemical industries, which is where the high temperature corrosive conditions sort of exist, excuse me, who need to improve MTBR, mean time between repairs. A shift to CalRes brand O-rings can improve total output, $2.5 million, $500,000 by reduced costs by $500,000 by substantially reducing the number of unplanned shutdowns. And then the little asterisk here is say for an average gasification power generation facility. If you were talking to a refinery, you'd have a different number. But the point is, it's a real specific number, and do you think that would get somebody's attention? It did, obviously. It's working. It's been a good business. Reason to believe their high performance perfluoride elastomer, even if you don't know what that is from DuPont, and it's resistant to process temperatures of over 600 degrees Fahrenheit and over 1,800 chemicals. Lasts 12 times longer. That's our difference. And so if you can put that story together, now you've decided who am I going to sell it to, what's it worth, and why should you believe that it's going to work? Going to get a little, everybody kind of with me here so far? All right, but here's the important part. When they went to investors in DuPont, and the time this came up, there were 80 strategic business units, and in DuPont, what they used to do, we used the discounted internal rate of return as a way of comparing a whole bunch of different investment opportunities, right? Not necessarily the perfect measure, but what they knew is everybody fudged the numbers. everybody fudged the numbers. So they used to take the IRRs and divide them by 3 and then make a decision, right? Because everybody knew that was the decision criterion, so they tended to, oh yeah, it's gonna be better than I thought, you know, it's gonna grow sooner. Not to say that DuPonters are liars, but what I'm saying is people sometimes make their projects look better than they do. Why was this one so attractive? If they had sold it for 24 bucks a piece, it would have still been profitable, but it would have been extraordinarily mediocre. It wouldn't have been competing for any kind of money. But what happened in this case, it was obvious that the inventors understood the market for the product, understood what it was worth, and also, and this is important, understood there was only going to be modest volume. You can make all the O-rings in the world, there's still not very much stuff, right? But the point is they had a very cohesive story because they knew what it was worth, they knew who would use it, and they knew it would be a very, very high margin business, which it has continued to be over 25 years. Even though there's a lot more difficult competitive environment now, we've gotten better, other people have gotten better faster, so the margins aren't quite as high, but it's still a very attractive business focused. Make sense? Make sense back there? Okay. All right. So the key thing here though, and again, we mentioned it about 4 times, so I'll stop saying it, is that you have to focus on something. If you're gonna take the product to market, or if you're gonna develop a product to go to a specific market, you need to find out and decide what that market is. And this is kind of a little process chart that I think kind of helps make the point. There's 2 things that need to come together for us to decide that we're gonna want to produce this thing. First off, it needs to create value for the customer, right? In other words, we need to be able to identify a gap in the customer's current operations that we can close. We need to identify a gap that we can do better than the incumbent, all right? And then the next thing we have to decide whether or not the improvement we're making is significant enough to compel the customer to actually want to make a change, right? If it's a drop-in, it's kind of a no-brainer, but normally they're not. In your case, maybe it is, I don't know, but normally you have to change something else if they're going to use us. And so how much value do we create for them? This is all about them, it's not about us. Does it work? Does it create enough value for them that it's important enough to say, like, yeah, I'm kind of interested in maybe taking a look at this further, okay? So that's, if we pass that test, and frequently won't, a lot of places we might start out, we simply don't have what it takes. And that's good. Quitting early is smart. If you get that far and say, oh, it's not us. Don't beat your head against the wall, pick the next place, try it again, try the next thing. The second thing is this any good for us? If I understand their problem, can I figure out how, and I have some understanding of the competitive situation, how much can I charge for this? What sort of margins ought I be able to make? Number 1. Number 2, is this some sort of dead kind of business, or is it something that's growing pretty fast? If they start using my stuff, all right, will they continue to use it, and will the volume grow here over time? All right? And it either will or it won't. It might still be okay if it's not growing, if your margins are high enough, but it's important you walk in the door not thinking it's going to double again, if it's not going to do that. All right? You know, think about microwaves, right? When they first came out, everybody wanted to get one, and they were like this, right? It's like iPhones, or phones in general, right? The market was like this, and now everybody's got one. Or in my case, 2 or 3. I think I still got them sitting around the house somewhere. But anyway, the point is the growth rate for these things is slowing, because once you get the idea. All right, boom. And then finally, what about ease of access? And this is something we forget. And 2 of our businesses right now, the Black Hills Regional Angel Fund, which will remain nameless at this point, have a real jam because they are selling to the government, and the government speed at which they make decisions kind of makes Glacial look fast, right? And so the point is, you may go out of business before they actually buy anything if they have, and some medical stuff might fall into the same category for different reasons. Lots and lots of testing required in advance before you're actually ever going to sell the first unit. And so understanding how fast you can get in and what that's going to cost you to get qualified is a critical dimension for you to understand. So sometimes a less profitable but less profitable business you get into fast might ultimately be more attractive, so that, over time you can build resources and go after the other one, if you're still the right choice over time. So you do that kind of analysis, and if you come out to be a good fit, then you have to decide, how am I gonna sell it? And then you start to learn more and more and more about how the customer uses it, which implies, in Dan's world, that you're also gonna find out a way to find other sources of value that you can add in. So what you're delivering is not just the one solution, and that's worth this, but you're delivering 2 or 3 or 4 elements of a solution, which are worth more. And over time, if you do your homework, you can find those things. Okay, you're saying, Dan, this is great. I've got a little organization. How do I do this? Because this looks like a lot of work. And, well, it is. All right, so my suggestion for a really straightforward process, using the resources you've got, maybe you can buddy up with some other folks in the room or in your lab or wherever you're working, but the notion is pick 1 or 2 segments. If you're working on something, you already have an idea who might use it and what they might use it for. Is that a fair statement? Mm-hmm. Okay. You already have that, so just pick 2 of them very precisely and come up with what I would call a segment hypothesis. This company is going to want to use my stuff to replace the stuff they're using now, and I should be able to deliver a yield improvement of X%. I should be able to reduce returned vehicles by Y%, or I should be able to have the vehicle run longer, or whatever it is. Doesn't mean you know for sure it's true, but you believe right now it's possible. And then what you have to do, as with any hypothesis, you got to go out and find out whether that's true or not. All right, and so my experience is a lot of companies that do this successfully, if they got 2 or 3 people kind of working in the lab on this, you divvy up the task, or you talk to your brother-in-law, or you talk to somebody else who can get out and get access to real customers. Now, there's a lot of stuff on the internet now, and you can do a lot of homework in advance, for sure. There's a lot you can find out, but sooner or later, you actually need to talk to live people to get answers to these questions. And some people will be more open than others, but over time, you'll get the hang of, which is a whole different discussion for a different day, unless somebody wants to bring it up at the end, we can talk about, the ability to ask open questions, to get people, how does something like that work? It's kind of an open question, and get people talking about what's going on. This works well in bars with employees of the business, by the way, just a tip. Anyway, what's the current competitive offering? How do they use it? What are the gaps? What could be better? And one of the best ways is to not go frontal and say, hey, what's wrong with what you're using now? A great way to start is like, what do you like about that product? What do you like about that? What could be better? So you don't walk in with the notion that you're threatening, you're just trying to find out, because you are really doing a different kind of research here. Can we save cost? Because their yield is improved, or they can use less of our stuff and whatever they're using in the current one. Can we make them more from current facilities? Let me just make this point. If you can do something that improves the productivity of their existing fixed costs, which, as I mentioned, sort of what a lot of the stuff we did this is gold. This is the keys to the bank, because what you're now doing is you're enabling them to make new products based on selling price minus variable cost. This is big money. This is big margins. If you can do something to drive that, you've probably found something that's worth a lot to that company. Excuse me. Can we help them improve quality? If we can, could that help them improve market share? What's that worth? A little harder to get that one, but it's there, and it's another possible avenue towards value. So my suggestion is we just do this exercise first, and you don't really need to mess with the rest of this unless you get some hints to say, I think I've got something here. I think we can do something based on what I've learned, at least with some of these customers. Then after that, you need to kind of understand how much they're using. Are they growing fast or not? What's the timeline process for new product approval? Who approves it? Is it the manufacturing folks? Is it technical? Is it R&D? In a lot of cases, it's all 3, starting with somebody in the technical function and sort of working its way back to manufacturing. and what's their buying process, and, you know, what kind of buyers are they? These are more sophisticated questions to get the answers to, but it's really not worth messing with this too much unless you get a hint up here that you've got something to work on. Make sense? I need a little more body light, help me.
Yeah.
I'm an elderly person, I need some energy. Okay, yes, all right, okay. Once you start doing this, and again, you want to hit a bunch of people in the target segments that you've picked, collect their answers and start to see where is there some commonality. Because whatever you invent may or may not be one size fits all. Maybe it works better with smaller customers who can't afford to make certain kind of changes to be more productive. Maybe it works better with bigger customers who might already be kind of set up to use your stuff. Maybe there's 3 or 4 different processes to make whatever it is that your customers produce. Maybe some of those processes are much more amenable to using our solution than others. You get the idea. Maybe it's just a geographic thing. You know, I used to be in the sulfuric acid business, and you measure your competitive position in truck miles from your nearest competitor, right? Because the freight costs more than the stuff you're shipping, right? So it depends on the nature of whatever you're making in the business, okay? Anyway, try to figure out, you know, I think I've got something here, and then you really you need to go back and hit it hard and talk to as many people that fit your description of where you think you can work to make sure you really know what you're talking about and you can start to refine your understanding of the value you actually bring. We were at one of these startup seminars a couple of years ago, and they said, you know, you need to probably talk to 100 customers. That would sound like a really high number to a lot of you. It does to me too. But I think if you get like 10 or more, 15, 20, something like that, you can start to get an idea. I think I've got something. And then maybe at that point you can get some support and do something more broadly. Okay. Let me hint this again. There's lots and lots and lots of ways that you can create value. So when you do one thing, it also has an impact on potentially a bunch of other things. Example, if we can improve yield, ultimately we make more with less. So first off, there's a cost reduction of some consequence, equals a profit improvement, equals lower working capital for revenues, might equal that, equals maybe lower waste to process. You got it? So now there's 4 things instead of just one that comes from yield improvement. And so you want to start looking through here to say, like, what else can I impact and what's that worth? And so you might need to bring in, if you're not a real business savvy person, you might want to bring in somebody who is, and have them start thinking with you about what are all the ways that my product improves the performance of the customer. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Okay. Before I go to this, because this is, we're getting to the end, we're getting ready to work, we're gonna make you work here in a minute. Is there anything I've said so far that just flat doesn't make sense or seems too hard to do? Or anything that from your experience, actually really works that you'd like to reinforce for the rest of the folks in the room?
There's one area that I became involved was when the product was not used properly, although it was advertised.
Your product or?
One of my products was advertised as do not exceed 280 C.
Right.
Customer took it up to 350 C, which is really way above it.
Yep.
And they wanted me, company, to design and test a new product, different product, using new materials.
Right. Because the other ones weren't good enough because they misused your stuff.
Correct, and they didn't yell at me, but, you gotta improve your product, like, you really, now, it was one of these, fluoride lubricant that once it gets above 290, it starts to dissociate.
Right.
Well, when they took.
Kills your canary, that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, when it mixes with water or moisture, it becomes hydrofluoric acid.
Yeah.
And they didn't like that. I said, well, we're at 300.
There's a lot not to like about hydrofluoric acid.
But where's the water coming from at 350? They said, well, we don't know. We'll have to look into that.
Yeah.
And then they went away. Interesting.
Misuse, no, I got you, yeah. And that, but you see, it's an important thing to understand and have an ability to find that out. That's happening. Other thoughts, comments? Yes, sir.
So, this might be far away from what the point was, but for the product that you're giving an example of, I followed that it had 12 times better performance.
Check.
It had a value of, an initially thought of value of 25,000, if I remember that.
$24
$24 a unit. And, but the avoided cost, or the total cost, or if I remember right,
Yep.
$1,250,000. So how did they, what process did they go through where they arrived at the price?
Sure.
So there's a gap there that I didn't catch.
Gotcha. Okay, so the notion here was they found out that, well, let me step back. We always share value with the customer. We're always sharing value with the customer. And so if we raise the price, they get less, we get more, right? And so the notion was, how do I capture, in this case, how do I capture about, a substantial portion of the value that I'm creating for the customer? Remember, now it was $173,000 delivered, about $3 million worth of value for the customer, right? And so there's another thing, if you think about negotiating, which is something we can talk about too if you want, there's something that's called the range of reason. So they could have actually come up and said, for only $1 million, we can give you O-rings that will save you $2.5 million. There would have been, but that would have been way outside the range of reason. I mean, these guys are looking at, cents per unit versus, a bunch of dollars per unit. So the notion was you had to table a number that captured a substantial portion of the value, but offered a balance along this line of what I'll call range of reason. So it's a little bit sort of like this, and you can bet it's like the first time somebody ate a raw oyster. We were talking about that last night. It took a little nerve for the folks to come in and some chutzpah, right, to say it's worth this. And then when the customer, we're going to get into that discussion now, so it's a pretty timely question. So when the customer pushes back, you say, well, help me understand if what I tell you is true, that we can avoid 5 of those shutdowns, and you've already tested this enough to know this lasts a hell of a lot longer than those nitrile O-rings. What's that worth to you? And it would be hard if they're candid. Sometimes they're cute, but if they're candid, they can see the values there. And so it has to be kind of a trade-off. The other thing that's, it's what I call the lycra spandex lesson. If you price it too high, you invite everybody in the world to come in and compete with you, all right? And so when I was living in Asia in the 90s, and DuPont was still the world leader by far in lycra spandex, which is great stuff. Everybody, when the patents had run out, all the major chemical companies in Asia started making their version of spandex, and most of it was crap. It did not perform anywhere near as well as the DuPont lycra, but it went to #1. It was the most profitable business in everybody's shop. Because even though it was no good, they could still sell some of it because the price umbrella was set so high that everybody got in, and it eventually really deteriorated the quality of the lycra business because they got better once they started making it. So let's kind of stay on the topic you've got here and talk about what I call the valuable value hypothesis conversation, right? So you don't know for sure what you can charge for CalRes, right? You don't know for sure. But you do your homework, which is kind of what we just saw there. You look at wages, power, other relevant costs, shipments, freight costs, estimated variable costs. Tease out whatever information. If this is a medical product, if you're making a new body part, a hip or something else, it's different data for sure. All right, but find out what is the relevant data and put your story together And basically, you come up with a place where that you've reasoned out. You can't, we're not just saying like smoke one and write this down. What we're saying is what you need to do is some homework and come up with a credible story why your product is what you say it's worth. Everybody with me so far? Are you sure it's true? No. I had people, I had a guy in tears one time in Canada. I wasn't trying to get him in tears, but he was, I can't tell somebody something I don't know for sure is true. I'd be lying, right? And the answer is, no you wouldn't, because you're not representing it as absolute truth. It's not chiseled in granite. What you're saying is, I put together my story, and based on my understanding, I think, and what we see in other customers, we estimate a shift to our offering could save you $1 million a year. Could save you $1 million a year. And some people would say, like, well, that's interesting. How does that work? What makes you think that's true? And then you show them your story. Here's how I figured it out. They go like, well, that's not really quite right. You go like, okay, well then, can we look at the numbers and help me get this right? And people will, as often as not, help you work through the numbers. Your estimate of this is too high, your estimate of that is too low, your estimate of this and so forth. Some people are open, some people are less open. But the point is, after you start having this discussion about your value with a customer, where you get a dialogue going, now you're using their numbers. You're not using your numbers anymore. Sometimes people are cagey and they go, well, no, that's not the right number. And the damn response to that is, I guess it's twice that size then, right? It's $2 million? No, that's not it. Oh, I'm sorry. Where'd I go wrong? You with me here? The point is, you come up with a story and then you start testing that with the customers. You find it's a way to find out what the real numbers are or what something close is. Then you do it over again. The next time you talk to the next customer, you take what you've learned here and you refine your story. And you go to the next one and you refine your story. And by the time you've talked to enough people, you've got a pretty decent handle on what you might be worth. Is it easy? No. Does it require a certain amount of subtlety in how you ask the questions? And particularly the body language? You know? Open, positive, curious. Wow, really? Is that true? No kidding. How did that happen? How did that work? Right? It's that kind of reaction. And a lot of times we're so desperate to sell something, we're intense. We want to leave the intensity behind. We're curious and interested because we want to help them do better. And this value hypothesis conversation can really make a significant difference, helping you get there. Yeah.
With the project I have to sell myself, my experience, why what I say is true, because of my experience. I got a lot of years behind me. And the product is in the process of being proven, but the process is based on my experience.
Right.
That's what I'm
You're a guy who
selling.
knows what he's talking about. That's why your nickname is Slick.
Yeah, that's right.
That's just lubricants, guys, in case you didn't get that.
I just renamed my product, Ever Slick.
Bingo. All right. No, that's absolutely right. Sometimes the biggest credibility comes from you if you're a recognized expert, which is great. A lot of people don't have that leverage, and so it's a great way to get the conversation in the first place, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that is hard for me to understand as I work up with startup companies, if you work for a company like DuPont, it's easy to get in the door because you sort of own, the whole company's 200 years of plus credibility is there. You're starting up on your own, you need something else. And if you don't have a great reputation and great background, then humility is the best thing. I'm starting a business, I think I've got something that could really help you. So, all right, we're getting to the end. So the point here is this. As you start thinking about value, it's useful to get what I call pocket numbers. If you're focusing in a particular industry, the wage rates for that industry tend to be about the same. If they're making the same product, you can find all kinds of markers on the internet for what the raw materials typically would cost, or at least a range of what those raw materials are. Once you kind of know those things, it enables you to do what I call talk that talk. It enables you to walk in there and act like you know stuff that maybe you know or you don't know, but you say enough things to be credible. People won't tell you things if they think you don't know. If they think you actually do understand and know things, they will tell you things that you have no idea are true. They'll give you more information, they'll let you in. And again, you bring that with you because you have the expertise in the background. But for those of us who don't, if you start doing some homework first, that helps you get there. Develop your value hypothesis. Back to the numbers again. When somebody tells you that could save about, we could reduce consumption about 10%, you can say that'd be worth about $250,000 with it. And it gives you another way to sort of nail down something specific that in the next conversation with the next person you can use, and with them for sure. When you go back and decide what price you want to charge, we already talked about this. It's going to cost. We could save you $250. It's going to cost you an extra $50. Does that seem like a reasonable trade-off or not? Right. And you have to face that. Yes, sir.
So it seems to me that, and this fits with what we talked about in the first week, is that part of this story is you have to get something out that you can prototype quickly. In other words, it's one thing to have theory about your value proposition. It's another to say, hey, I built some O-rings and here's what they did. So how do you go about getting basically a test?
For something you don't have. Or for something you do have, I'm sorry.
Or an early prototype.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay, I mean, to me, I think you try to find out, you need to do enough homework to know that there's a problem that needs to be solved.
Right. Yep.
And then again, I'm sort of in the humility thing, unless you've got a kind of reputation background where you don't need to be quite that humble, but the notion is you go in and say, look, we're working on something that I think could have a very positive impact on your overall financial performance, or, whatever it works. Or if you're talking to the manufacturing guy, the quality or the output or, whatever it is. Something they get measured for. One of the good things to do is do some homework, because it's usually isn't that hard to find out. Find out how people get paid, not how much they get paid, although that's always interesting. If they get a bonus, what's the bonus based on? Right? We know for purchasing what that is, right? And for manufacturing, it usually has something to do with output and safety. Those are the two things, at least in my experience, that seem important. So you want to frame whatever you talk about in terms of that. And say, look, I'm working on this. I'm not there yet. But here's what I've got, and I think it'll do this. How would that fit with your operations? Do you think we'll deliver something like that? You're going to have to do a what-if kind of thing. And if they see that you're trying to really help them in a genuine way, maybe you can start to partner with somebody. One of the biggest problems we're having with Nanoparel right now, where we're doing biopharma separation work, is getting people to give us apps. We have lab data that says we are order of magnitude better in terms of residence time versus resins that they're using right now. We're using nanofibers instead of resins, and these big columns of packed resins that are treated with stuff to do these separations. And we know we're order of magnitude faster, and our capture rate might be a couple orders of magnitude better. And so that's all lab data. And what we're trying to do right now is to get some real life data to get people to tell us that. The problem is they're smart too. They know if they give us all the information that we're going to come back and charge them for it, right? Which we're going to do anyway. But the point is, if we can really make it go for them, they're not going to not use our product if it's that much better. But it's a little harder to get sometimes than others and say like exactly what's the value here. We can make a good guess based on our work, but sometimes, as you guys who have done it would know, sometimes things don't scale up exactly the way they operate in the lab, right? Sometimes they're better, sometimes they're not as good. But I think again, going in and trying to find somebody who will operate as a partner and with some transparency. We're looking at, giving some people some special early access to things in return for data transparency. We just started working some stuff with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which might really be powerful stuff. We think we can get that kind of relationship with that. So what I have now, and with some help we'll pass out, is the format that you've seen on one side, and two filled out versions of it on the other. And I was going to say, for those of you who are actually, thank you. Those of you who are actually working on something, now's your chance to roll your own. All right, so let me move the slide. How are we doing on time?
What is the time, Mary?
9 past 5.
It's stick
a
around
prisoner.
till 11. I'll leave it. So if you have to leave, we absolutely understand. That said, we are going to be doing kind of a project, which I've done before with you, and I found very, very valuable. And we'll be here till 11. So we hope you guys can stick around and hear more about your specific project and what Dan feels could be your next step. So, all right, please.
So if we had time to do this, what we were gonna do is, I'm just gonna say, like, you know, go to the flip side of that thing and just try to fill it out. If you're an early stage, it's okay. Make some guesses. Fill it in the best way you can, which is the sort of blank side, the back with all the space to write things on. The front side just has a couple of examples and the format as well. And take a shot at it. And again, early in my career with DuPont, I got a job running what we used to call the ore house for the titanium dioxide business. So you make titanium dioxide, you use an iron titanate mineral that's mined as the key raw material. And so I had a situation where we had a mining operation that we owned about 30% of in Australia, and it was failing because they made this really low-cost raw material that was great for us, but didn't create much value for the mine. So we had to back our way into the ownership of the mine, and we knew that was coming. This is like the first day I went the job. And so the guy who I worked for was one of the best bosses I had at DuPont. And he said, well, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start off by writing the white paper for the acquisition of the rest of the mine. And the white paper was a vehicle that went up to the board to get approval for spending money to buy something, right? And I said, well, we don't really have any of that information. He said, that's exactly right. So he said, we're gonna write the white paper exactly how, and then all the blanks that we can't fill in defines what our work's gonna be about what we have to find out in order to make this thing go. So that's kind of the exercise I'm talking about here, all right? Try to write it, try to make it happen for you, and then to the extent that you can't fill it out, you now know what you need to go find out. And if you've got something that you've been working on, maybe it's a way to start refining it. Questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Given the kind of the biomed nature of the shark hub and things, customer can be challenging to define the kind of the medical device space, because the recipient of a device, the patient, doesn't have any decision-making power, or little. You got the doctor, and you got the insurance company, and the Medicare and Medicaid. Who's the best person to think of as the customer when you're talking about a medical device? Is it better to think business to customer or business to business?
I would think it would be the insurance company, because if it works for the patient in improving their health, that makes the patient pay health insurance longer.
I think the answer is, first off, I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer your question, but here's what I'm thinking of. So who benefits the most? Who potentially benefits the most from this? Okay, obviously you're eventually the person who's getting something implanted in or used in is a huge beneficiary, but by and large, today they don't pay for it. And so the insurance company feels like a good one. Also, the person who's the company that's probably going to take your invention and commercialize it, if it's not you, would be another way to go. And but I kind of like the idea of starting out maybe with an insurance company or a payer, whatever payer needs, right?
It's Medicare and Medicaid that usually sets the prices, because even insurance is usually indexed off of that. So.
Yeah, I get a monthly report, and it's like the last one I had I read yesterday, and the charges were $7,900 for some sort of very routine stuff I got done, and Medicare paid $815, and Aetna paid 20% of $815. So we have a ridiculous system. The numbers make no sense at all. But yeah, I mean, the point would be, can we do something that is a benefit, kind of across the board? Something that works is going to be better or lower cost. But I worked with a pharmaceutical company doing challenger sales training, and they can't even talk about cost. When they're trying to sell stuff to doctors and stuff like that, they can only tell them what it does. It's apparently against the law to actually say this was a lot cheaper than that one, yeah.
Major choke point in that sector are the distributors, like McKesson's, companies that, where your customers are, where your patients are, your doctors, they are usually under an obligation to go with a single distributor.
Yep.
And of course, the big dog out there is McKesson, and so, that's usually a customer, or it's in a mix of customers.
Well, and some of the big value you add in the medical device space is now Medicare will often pay for things being done once, but they won't pay for it being done again.
Yep.
And so we seem to be getting a lot of interest from the surgeons the surgeons in the hospitals for not being on the hook a second time. That's one of the values that you're gonna add.
And there's all kinds of ways to sort of game that system. I did some work with Sodexo, and it might be something Sodexo, but anyway, they do hospital services, like the people in the hospital, the ones that do the maintenance in the room and so forth. And there's a score now that the government uses, I think, in terms of compensating the hospital. I can't remember my old brain can't remember the name of it. But people get graded, and if you get good grades, they get a compensation at a certain level. If you get bad grades, you might not get any. I want to call it the Epcot score, but that's not right. But it's something that sort of sounds like that. But anyway, what the Sodexo people have trained the maintenance people to do when they go in the room is to have a conversation with the patient while they're cleaning the room, whether they're doing a good job or not.
Yeah.
But the patient remembers they had a nice conversation and they get high scores, right? So there's gaming that goes along with that too. So anyway, hey, come on, clean up that corner and shut up, right? So but anyway, so no, you're exactly right. So I'm having a hard time giving you a good answer to that question, but I think again, it's like who benefits. It's sort of like, follow the money kind of thing, so. And it might be multi-step deal, and it is a multi-step deal. for sure.
One of the upsides, the stuff we're working is, the docs that we talk with, they at least have good technical understanding. And so they can appreciate some of the differences.
Yeah, and sometimes you're gonna come up with something nobody's thought of, right? Here's a better way to do whatever it is, and then there's real value there.
But then that's gonna take you a long time. Because you hope for a 510K.
Good deal.
We still want your questions, and there is absolutely time for that. The room is going to get cut in half, and we're going to create kind of a U shape to have more of a roundtable discussion with your remaining questions and some of your more specifics. But for this presentation portion, please help me in thanking Dan very much.